Michelle stepped onto the airplane with tired eyes but a satisfied smile. The past month had been a whirlwind since her promotion to chief of police in her hometown of Riverdale. 15 years on the force had prepared her for many things, but the mountain of paperwork that came with leadership wasn't one of them. This conference couldn't have come at a better time, a chance to meet other chiefs and learn how they managed their departments. She found her seat in first class, a rare splurge she allowed herself for the 5-hour flight. The soft leather seat welcomed her as she settled in, placing her small carry-on under the seat in front. Michelle pulled out the leadership book she'd been meaning to read for months and placed it on her lap. Perhaps she'd finally have time to start it. Around her, other passengers filed into the plane. Business people in crisp suits, families with excited children, college students with headphones already plugged in. The usual pre-flight buzz filled the cabin as flight attendants welcomed everyone aboard with practiced smiles. Michelle closed her eyes for just a moment, letting the tension drain from her shoulders. The past week had included 3 community meetings, a budget review, and a particularly difficult case involving a local business owner. She deserved this moment of peace. "Excuse me, ma'am." Michelle opened her eyes to find a TSA agent standing in the aisle beside her seat. He was tall, with a stern expression that seemed permanently etched into his face. His uniform was pressed perfectly, badge gleaming under the cabin lights. "Yes," Michelle responded politely, though confusion crept into her voice. TSA agents typically didn't board planes after passengers were seated. "There seems to be an issue with your boarding." "I need to see your boarding pass again," he stated flatly. Michelle reached for her purse, pulling out the slightly crumpled boarding pass she'd already shown twice, once at security and again while boarding the plane. "Here you go," she said, handing it over. "Is there a problem?" The agent examined the pass with exaggerated care, looking from the paper to Michelle and back again. "This seat is reserved for priority passengers," he said finally. Michelle blinked in surprise. "I purchased a first-class ticket. That's what this seat is assigned to me." By now, nearby passengers were watching the interaction with undisguised interest. The woman across the aisle raised an eyebrow, while the businessman in front turned around in his seat. "Are you sure you're in the right section?" The agent pressed, his voice growing louder. "These seats are typically for our executive travelers." Michelle felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the same feeling she'd experienced countless times throughout her career when someone made assumptions based solely on her appearance. She took a deep breath before responding. "I'm exactly where my ticket says I should be," she replied evenly. "Seat 4A. The agent's expression hardened. "I think there's been a mistake in the system. It would be best if you gathered your things. We can find you another seat in the main cabin." A flight attendant approached, drawn by the escalating conversation. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, glancing between Michelle and the agent. "This passenger may need to be relocated," the agent said before Michelle could speak, "or possibly removed from the flight if she continues to be uncooperative." The flight attendant looked uncomfortable as passengers began to murmur. A middle-aged man sitting by the window pulled out his phone and subtly began recording. "I'd like to speak with a supervisor," Michelle said calmly, though her heart raced. "I've done nothing wrong, and I'm sitting in my assigned seat." "Ma'am, I have the authority to remove uncooperative passengers for security reasons," the agent stated firmly. "I'm going to need you to come with me now." The cabin had grown completely silent. Every eye was on their confrontation. Michelle realized this moment was bigger than just her. It represented something far too many people experience daily. Little did the agent know, he had just made a serious misjudgment about who exactly he was attempting to remove from the flight. The tension in the air grew thick as more passengers turned to watch what was happening. Michelle kept her breathing steady, though her hands had curled into fists on her lap. 15 years of police work had taught her how to stay calm in hostile situations. This was no different. "Sir," she said, her voice clear and controlled, "I've shown you my boarding pass. I'm in the correct seat that I paid for. I'd like you to explain exactly what security concerns you're referring to." The agent shifted his weight, glancing around at the now attentive audience they'd gathered. "It's protocol, ma'am. When something doesn't seem right, we have to investigate." "And what exactly doesn't seem right?" Michelle pressed, meeting his gaze directly. A woman 2 rows ahead turned completely around in her seat. She was sitting quietly reading when you approached her, she called out. What could possibly be wrong with that? The agent's face reddened. Ma'am, this doesn't concern you. Actually, said an older gentleman across the aisle who had been observing the entire encounter, I think it concerns all of us when someone is being treated unfairly. The flight attendant who had approached earlier now looked deeply uncomfortable. She leaned closer to the TSA agent and whispered something, but he shook his head firmly. Look, the agent said, lowering his voice slightly but still loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Either you gather your things and come with me now, or I call for backup and you'll be escorted off. Michelle felt a familiar burn of indignation rising in her chest. The same feeling she'd experienced countless times throughout her career, at the police academy, during her first years as a patrol officer, and even after making detective. The feeling of having to prove herself over and over again. I'd like your name and badge number, Michelle requested calmly. Excuse me. The agent's eyebrows shot up. Your name and badge number, Michelle repeated. And I'd like to speak with your supervisor immediately. Ma'am, I don't think you understand the seriousness. No, I don't think you understand the seriousness, Michelle interrupted, her patience finally wearing thin. Because right now, you're delaying an entire flight based on absolutely nothing. The businessman who had been recording the encounter spoke up. I've got this whole thing on video, he announced, just so everyone knows. The flight attendant touched the agent's arm. Maybe we should contact the supervisor, she suggested quietly. The agent shook her off. This is a security matter, he insisted. And I'm telling you, this passenger needs to deplane immediately. Based on what evidence? Michelle challenged, finally standing up to face him directly. Though she wasn't tall, her presence seemed to fill the space between them. Years of authority had given her a confident stance that made even the towering agent take a small step back. I don't have to explain myself to you, he said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier conviction. Actually, you do, Michelle replied. You need probable cause to remove someone from a flight they've legally boarded. That's basic civil rights law. The agent's eyes narrowed. How would you know about? Because, Michelle said, reaching slowly into her purse, I've spent my entire career upholding those laws. She pulled out a small leather wallet and flipped it open, revealing a gleaming badge. I'm Chief Michelle Carter of the Riverdale Police Department. And I believe we need to have a serious conversation about why you singled me out among all these passengers. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the airplane's ambient noise seemed to fade away as everyone processed what had just happened. The agent's face went from red to ash white in seconds. Professor James Wilson watched the entire scene unfold from his window seat in the row behind Michelle. As a sociologist who studied power dynamics in public spaces, he couldn't have scripted a more perfect example of what he lectured about at the university. He'd started recording on his phone the moment the TSA agent's tone turned confrontational. The look on the agent's face when Michelle revealed her badge was something James would never forget. It was like watching a balloon deflate, all the bluster and authority vanishing in an instant. I was just following protocol, the agent stammered, his earlier confidence evaporating. What protocol exactly? Michelle asked, still holding her badge where everyone could see it. The one where you single out passengers based on how they look rather than any actual security concern. By now, the entire first-class cabin was completely silent, with many passengers holding phones up to record the confrontation. Even people from the economy section had started to gather at the dividing curtain, curious about the delay. The flight attendant, recognizing the severity of the situation, pressed the intercom button on her handset. Captain, we have a situation that requires your attention in the cabin, she said, her voice noticeably shaking. James leaned forward slightly. Chief Carter, he said, introducing himself, I'm Professor James Wilson from Riverdale Community College. I've been recording this interaction since it began. Would you like a copy of the video? Michelle nodded gratefully. Thank you, Professor. That would be helpful. The TSA agent's radio crackled to life. Rollins, what's the holdup? The flight should have departed 5 minutes ago. With a shaking hand, the agent reached for his radio. We have a situation, he mumbled. I'm going to need a supervisor on board." "What kind of situation?" the voice crackled back. The agent looked at Michelle, then at the sea of recording phones, and swallowed hard. "Just send a supervisor," he repeated, avoiding the question. An older woman sitting across from James spoke up. "I've been flying this route twice a month for 15 years, and I've never once seen a TSA agent board a plane to check passengers who were already seated. Never." Murmurs of agreement spread through the cabin. "Exactly what made you choose this passenger to question?" James asked loudly, making sure his voice was clear on his recording. "Out of everyone on this flight?" The agent shifted uncomfortably. "As I said, it's just routine." "It's not routine," interrupted another passenger, a middle-aged man in a business suit. "I'm a platinum member with over 2 million miles on this airline. There's nothing routine about this." Michelle maintained her composure, though James could see the slight tremble in her hand as she continued to hold her badge. This wasn't just a professional moment for her, it was deeply personal. "I believe," Michelle said clearly, "that we're experiencing a textbook case of profiling. And as chief of police, I find that particularly troubling coming from a federal security officer." The cabin door opened again, and an older man in a TSA uniform with more stripes on his shoulder entered. His eyes widened as he took in the scene, his agent standing awkwardly in the aisle, a woman holding a police badge, and dozens of passengers recording everything. "What's going on here?" the supervisor asked. "Your officer," Michelle explained calmly, "approached me after I was seated, demanded to see my boarding pass again, and then insisted I needed to leave the plane. When asked for a reason, he cited security concerns, but couldn't name a single specific issue." The supervisor's face darkened as he looked at his agent. "Agent Rollins, step outside for a moment." As Rollins slunk toward the door, the supervisor turned to Michelle. "Ma'am, I sincerely apologize for this incident. May I ask who you are?" "Chief Michelle Carter, Riverdale Police Department," she replied. "And I'd like your full name as well for my report." The air in the cabin felt electric as the supervisor asked Michelle for her information. Everyone watched intently as she handed over her official credentials for inspection. The chief's calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to the nervous energy radiating from the TSA staff. "Chief Carter, I'm Thomas Wheeler, TSA Shift Supervisor," the older man said, examining her badge and ID with careful attention. "On behalf of the Transportation Security Administration, I want to extend our deepest apologies for this incident." Michelle nodded but remained professional. "I appreciate that, Mr. Wheeler, but an apology doesn't address the underlying issue here. What happened today isn't just about me." As Wheeler returned her credentials, the pilot emerged from the cockpit, having been informed of the delay. He glanced around the cabin, taking in the scene. Passengers with phones still recording, a TSA supervisor apologizing to a woman holding a police badge, and an atmosphere thick with tension. "What's the situation here?" the pilot asked, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone used to managing crises at 30,000 feet. Wheeler turned to explain, but Michelle spoke first. "Your flight is being delayed because one of your passengers was profiled and nearly removed without cause," she said clearly. "As the passenger in question and as a law enforcement official, I have serious concerns about how this was handled." The pilot's expression grew serious. "I see. And you are?" "Chief Michelle Carter, Riverdale Police Department," she replied. Professor Wilson stood up from his seat. "Captain, I've recorded the entire interaction." The agent demanded that the chief leave the plane without providing any legitimate reason, despite her having shown proper documentation. The elderly woman across the aisle joined in. "I saw everything too." He told her these first-class seats were for executive travelers, whatever that means. The captain nodded gravely. "Mr. Wheeler, I need this resolved immediately. We're already behind schedule, and I need to know if there's any actual security concern with this flight." "There is absolutely no security concern," Wheeler assured him, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "This appears to be a serious error in judgment by Agent Rollins." Michelle looked at her watch and then addressed everyone. "I don't want to delay your flight any longer. I'm happy to continue this conversation with Mr. Wheeler after we land, and I'll be filing a formal report." The captain seemed relieved. "Thank you, Chief Carter." Mr. Wheeler, is there any reason we can't proceed with our departure? No reason at all, Wheeler confirmed. Agent Rollins will be leaving the aircraft immediately. As Wheeler turned to leave, Michelle called after him. Mr. Wheeler, I'll need contact information for your department's oversight office, as well as a copy of your procedures for random passenger screenings, if that's indeed what this was supposed to be. Wheeler paused, visibly uncomfortable. Of course. I'll have that information sent to you. He quickly made his exit, avoiding the stares of the passengers. As the cabin door finally closed and the flight attendants began their delayed safety demonstration, Michelle sat back down, suddenly aware of how tightly she'd been gripping her armrests. Professor Wilson leaned forward again. Chief Carter, I'm sending you the video now. If you don't mind me asking, are you attending the National Law Enforcement Conference in Denver? Michelle nodded, surprised. Yes, I am. Are you presenting there? I am, he confirmed. On community police relations, actually. With your permission, what happened here today would make a powerful case study. A flight attendant approached with a glass of water. Chief Carter, the captain asked me to bring you this and to let you know that he'd like to speak with you once we're at cruising altitude, if that's all right. Around her, other passengers began offering supportive comments and sharing their own stories of being profiled or treated unfairly at airports. What had started as a humiliating experience was transforming into something else entirely, a moment of connection and shared understanding. As the plane finally began to taxi, Michelle looked out the window at the airport receding behind them. This wasn't how she planned to start her trip, but perhaps it was exactly where she needed to begin. The plane had been in the air for just 20 minutes when Michelle's phone started buzzing with notifications. Professor Wilson's video was spreading faster than anyone could have imagined. Chief Carter, a flight attendant, approached with a tablet in hand. Have you seen this? Your incident is already trending on social media. Michelle took the tablet and stared in disbelief at the screen. The video had already gathered over 50,000 views and was climbing rapidly. The hashtags #FlyingWhileBlack and #ChiefCarter were trending alongside it. I never imagined it would spread this quickly, Michelle said, handing the tablet back. The flight attendant nodded sympathetically. The airline's corporate office has already released a statement condemning the incident and promising a full investigation. She hesitated before adding, they're trying to get ahead of the story, PR nightmare and all that. A businessman across the aisle leaned over. My daughter just texted me asking if I'm on your flight. She saw the video on her college campus newsfeed. Michelle felt a strange mix of emotions washing over her. On one hand, she was a private person who never sought the spotlight. On the other, she recognized the importance of what had happened. As a police chief, she had spoken numerous times about the need for accountability and transparency in law enforcement. Now those same principles were being applied to a situation where she was the one experiencing injustice. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds. I've been made aware that many of you have questions about the incident that occurred prior to our departure. I want to assure everyone that the airline does not condone discriminatory behavior of any kind. Our staff will be available to take statements from anyone who witnessed the event once we land. Michelle closed her eyes, trying to process everything. What was supposed to be a quiet flight to a professional conference had turned into something much bigger. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a call from her deputy chief back in Riverdale. Chief, have you seen what's going on? Deputy Chief Thompson asked the moment she answered. I'm getting the picture, Michelle replied quietly, aware of passengers nearby who might overhear. How bad is it? The mayor's called twice. National news networks are reaching out for statements. The TSA director for the region has issued an emergency press release promising immediate action. Thompson paused. And your mother called. She wants to know why she had to find out from her church group that her daughter is internet famous. Despite everything, Michelle had to smile at that last bit. Tell everyone I'll issue a statement after I land. And tell my mother I'm fine and will call her tonight. As she ended the call, Professor Wilson approached from his seat. Chief Carter, I hope I'm not overstepping, but I thought you should know that the TSA agent, Rollins, has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. It's all over Twitter. Michelle nodded her thanks. She was still processing how quickly events were unfolding when a young flight attendant appeared with a satellite phone. "Chief Carter, I apologize for the intrusion, but we have the TSA National Director on the line. He's requesting to speak with you urgently." The entire first-class cabin seemed to hold its breath as Michelle accepted the phone. "This is Chief Carter," she said professionally. For the next few minutes, she listened more than she spoke, occasionally nodding or offering brief responses. When she finally handed the phone back, the passengers around her were watching expectantly. "The director offered a personal apology and has requested a meeting after we land," she explained to the curious faces around her. "They're sending representatives to meet the plane." An older gentleman 2 rows ahead turned around. "You know, my granddaughter wants to be a police officer. Would you mind if I took a picture with you when we land? You're exactly the kind of role model she needs to see." Michelle was taken aback by the request, but nodded. "I'd be honored," she said sincerely. As the plane continued its journey, Michelle realized something important was happening. This wasn't just about one incident on one plane. It was about accountability, about standing up to injustice, and about using one's position to create meaningful change. Her conference presentation on community policing suddenly seemed far more relevant than she had anticipated. The moment the plane touched down in Denver, it was clear this wasn't going to be a normal arrival. Through the windows, Michelle could see news vans with satellite dishes and reporters gathered near the terminal. The captain's voice came over the intercom, unusually solemn. "Ladies and gentlemen, as you may have noticed, there's significant media presence at our arrival gate. For passengers who wish to avoid the cameras, our crew will help arrange alternative exits through nearby gates. We ask for your patience as we coordinate with airport authorities." Michelle took a deep breath, mentally preparing herself. This kind of attention was the last thing she wanted, but sometimes leadership meant stepping into uncomfortable spotlights. Professor Wilson leaned over from his seat. "Chief Carter, I don't mean to intrude, but I've received 17 interview requests in the last hour. Reporters have somehow found my contact information." "I'm not surprised," Michelle replied, checking her own phone. "My department's public information officer says our switchboard is jammed. Even my sister in Atlanta is getting calls." The plane taxied to the gate and came to a stop. The captain appeared from the cockpit and approached Michelle directly. "Chief Carter, airport security has arranged for you to deplane first if you wish. There's a private lounge where representatives from the airline, TSA, and airport authority are waiting. Of course, you're under no obligation to meet with them." Michelle considered her options carefully. Part of her wanted to slip away quietly and continue to her conference as planned. But the leader in her, the same part that had driven her through the ranks to become chief, knew this moment mattered. "I'll meet with them," she decided. "But I'd like Professor Wilson to join me, since he documented the incident." As they gathered their belongings, passengers began approaching Michelle. A mother with 2 young daughters came first. "My girls saw what happened," she said quietly. "I want them to see how a strong woman handles herself with dignity when faced with injustice. Thank you for being that example." An elderly man who had been sitting quietly throughout the flight spoke next. "In my 76 years, I've seen too many people stay silent when they should speak up. What you did today matters, Chief." By the time Michelle reached the door, she had received business cards, handshakes, and words of support from nearly half the cabin. The flight attendant who had first noticed the trending video handed her a slip of paper. "These are all our names and contact information. Every crew member who witnessed what happened is willing to provide statements for any investigation or action you choose to pursue." The walk through the jetway felt longer than usual. At the end, a group of suited officials waited anxiously. Michelle recognized the airline's regional director from his photo on their website, standing alongside 2 TSA administrators and the airport's security chief. "Chief Carter," the airline director began, extending his hand. "I want to personally apologize for your experience today. What happened was unacceptable and does not reflect our values or policies." Michelle shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, but this isn't just about me. It's about ensuring no one faces this kind of treatment, badge or no badge." The group moved to a private conference room where the discussion continued. The TSA administrators presented preliminary findings from their rapid investigation, Agent Rollins had a history of passenger complaints that had been inadequately addressed. The airline officials outlined immediate changes to their training protocols. As the meeting concluded, the airport security chief pulled Michelle aside. "The press is still waiting. We can arrange a private exit if you prefer." Michelle glanced through the window at the gathered media, cameras, microphones, and reporters eager for a statement. This wasn't what she had come to Denver for, but perhaps it was why she needed to be here. "No private exit," she decided. "But I need 5 minutes to make a call first." She dialed her department's number back in Riverdale. "Deputy Thompson, I need you to pull our community policing initiative documents, the ones we've been developing for the past 6 months. I think they just became more relevant than we expected." 6 months had passed since the airplane incident, but Michelle still received emails and messages about it almost daily. What had begun as a distressing confrontation had evolved into something much more meaningful than she could have imagined. Today marked another significant milestone as she stood backstage at the Homeland Security Training Center, reviewing her notes one final time. "5 minutes, Chief Carter," a young staff member informed her, clipboard in hand. "We have a full house out there." Michelle nodded her thanks and took a deep breath. The journey to this moment had been unexpected but transformative. The video of her confrontation with Agent Rollins had eventually amassed over 15 million views across various platforms. News outlets had covered the story for weeks, sparking national conversations about bias in security protocols and accountability in law enforcement. Rather than pursuing personal legal action as many had encouraged her to do, Michelle had chosen a different path. Within days of the incident, she had reached out to the TSA director with a proposal, a collaborative training program bringing together police departments and transportation security personnel to address unconscious bias in their procedures. "We have the same ultimate goal," she had told the skeptical director during their first meeting, "to keep people safe. But safety should never come at the expense of dignity or equal treatment under the law." To her surprise, the director had not only agreed, but had championed the initiative internally. What began as a small pilot program in Denver had expanded to 17 cities across the country. Today's conference marked the official nationwide rollout of the equity in security training protocols that Michelle had helped develop. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Deputy Thompson back in Riverdale, "Department's watching the livestream. Mayor says he's never been prouder to have you as chief." Michelle smiled, then scrolled through her photo gallery to a particular image, a picture taken just 3 weeks ago. In it, she stood next to Agent Rollins, both of them addressing a room of trainees. The journey to that moment hadn't been simple or comfortable for either of them. After being placed on administrative leave, Rollins had faced a disciplinary hearing where he'd initially defended his actions. But something shifted when he was shown the comprehensive data about disparities in secondary screenings and passenger removals. Michelle had been surprised when he'd reached out to her directly afterward, requesting a meeting. "I don't want to make excuses," he had told her during that first tense conversation at a coffee shop halfway between their offices. "I've spent 15 years convinced I was just doing my job, following protocols, keeping people safe. It's hard to face the possibility that what felt like instinct or experience might actually be bias." Rather than dismissing him, Michelle had challenged him. "Then help fix it. You know the system from the inside. Work with us to identify where these problems start and how to address them." That conversation had led to Rollins becoming an unexpected ally in developing the new training programs. His willingness to speak candidly about his own learning process had proven powerful in reaching other officers resistant to change. The announcer's voice pulled Michelle back to the present moment. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the architect of the Equity in Security Initiative, Riverdale Police Chief Michelle Carter." As Michelle walked onto the stage, the applause was thunderous. She scanned the audience, a sea of uniforms from various agencies, alongside community leaders and government officials. In the front row sat Professor Wilson, who had helped document the incident that started everything, and whose expertise in sociological aspects of authority had proven invaluable to the training curriculum. "Thank you," Michelle began as the applause faded. 6 months ago, I boarded a plane expecting nothing more than a routine flight to a conference. Instead, I found myself at the center of an incident that would ultimately bring all of us together today. She paused, making eye contact with audience members. What happened that day wasn't unique. It wasn't even particularly dramatic compared to what many people experience. The only unusual aspect was that I happened to be in a position of authority myself. But imagine all the travelers who don't have a badge to pull out when they're unfairly targeted. Their stories rarely make headlines, yet they experience these moments of injustice every day. Michelle gestured toward the screen behind her, where the training program outline appeared. 6 months had passed since the airplane incident, but Michelle still received emails and messages about it almost daily. What had begun as a distressing confrontation had evolved into something much more meaningful than she could have imagined. Today marked another significant milestone as she stood backstage at the Homeland Security Training Center, reviewing her notes one final time. 5 minutes, Chief Carter, a young staff member, informed her, clipboard in hand. "We have a full house out there." Michelle nodded her thanks and took a deep breath. The journey to this moment had been unexpected but transformative. The video of her confrontation with Agent Rollins had eventually amassed over 15 million views across various platforms. News outlets had covered the story for weeks, sparking national conversations about bias in security protocols and accountability in law enforcement. Rather than pursuing personal legal action as many had encouraged her to do, Michelle had chosen a different path. Within days of the incident, she had reached out to the TSA director with a proposal, a collaborative training program bringing together police departments and transportation security personnel to address unconscious bias in their procedures. "We have the same ultimate goal," she had told the skeptic. "This initiative isn't about blame. It's about recognition, accountability, and improvement. It's about ensuring that the power we've been entrusted with is used to protect everyone equally. Because true security can only exist alongside true justice."